This is lecture 131A in the ABCs of Communism series, supporting the forthcoming volume 8 on communism in North America among the peoples of the continent prior to the arrival of white people and white contact. And it's going to be chapter 111 if you're following the chapter series. The experimentation, well, it's on band and tribal agriculture and the urban revolution in North America, beginning with the western half of the U.S., and then the next lecture will go on to the eastern half, now, and Canada. Now, experimentation with plant domestication began in North America about the same time as it did in the rest of the Western Hemisphere. Three interrelated things should be kept in mind as we begin to explore the formative revolution. The first is that the Americas contained very few high-protein grass seeds compared to the Old World. Thus, experimentation in North America necessarily focused on these few potentially high-protein grass seeds. And the second is that experimentation on other edible plants accompanied the grass seed main target and was adequate to nutritional needs. Now third, although the American suite of these other plant domesticants was quite large, it was different from that available in the Old World, especially in South America, where cassava and potatoes were available as carbohydrate sources. Therefore, among other things, when we speak of an agricultural revolution horizon anywhere in the New World, we are also speaking of a different rate of agricultural reliance than was experienced in the Old World. Accordingly, the Old World stage of tribal agriculture should be seen in the New World as a stage of band and tribal agriculture, because the rate of reliance depends on the number of both grass seed protein supplier species, and this means hunting and gathering bands as well as tribes are involved in this hemisphere. Now, the high protein grasses are the sector that determines how fast the rate may be for reliance on agriculture as opposed to broad spectrum wild resource hunting and gathering. In the New World, as we've seen throughout these volumes, that rate was several thousand years slower than in the Old World. This is a drop in the bucket of human socio-cultural evolutionary time, but it is enough of a gap on close inspection to account for some substantial differences. For example, the time gap between the mode of production status of Mexico and Peru compared to Spain and Portugal would be decisive at the time of contact. For example, this meant the latter, that is Spain and Portugal, were in feudalism and had steel and firearms, while the former, that is the Mexico and Peru, were in slavery, and they had not yet invented steel nor firearms. Now, in our survey of primitive communism in North America before the advent of white contact, it is useful to divide North America into East and West, with the Great Plains in between. When discussing our American Neolithic or agricultural revolution, what we should more properly call a formative revolution in the New World following our William Phillips terminology. Now, the agricultural revolution in northwest Mexico and southwest USA led inevitably to the simple chiefdom stage. Now, the challenges confronting these simple chiefdoms led in turn to the final transition to advanced theocratic chiefdoms. And these ATCs were on the verge of the slave stage of an autochthonous servitude epoch when their development was cut short by white contact. European contact with the northwest Mexico, southwest USA was indirect at first and direct soon thereafter. A true urban revolution did occur in the ATC stage, and that is how we shall conclude this part of lecture 131. Now, there are distinct experimental zones in North America, beginning with the primitive communism of broad-spectrum wild resource hunting and gathering, and these experimental zones took on their own diagnostic characteristics in the eastern woodlands and the western deserts. The Great Plains were far narrower than they are today. Nevertheless, they formed a natural barrier between east and west. Now, going north from Querétaro in Mexico, the mountain chains and the coalitions of coastlines of North America acted as freeways for the movement of domestic plant carriers from Mesoamerica. People were constantly moving north of the latitudes of Querétaro and Tolan as their chiefdoms collapsed, and disgruntled farmer families headed toward relatively virgin lands. Eventually, oppressive ATCs and slave kingdoms emerged in central Mexico, and these produced a flow of discontented and disaffected lower ranks and enslaved families fleeing the state apparatus of one or another oppressive social order. In other words, once contact was established with the Cochise version of the desert culture 4,000 years ago, population movement northward was constant from Mesoamerica. Now, for our focus. As we have seen, the peoples of northwest Mexico and southwest U.S. were well prepared to accept the technology that came along with the immigrants. Much of North American archaeology after 4000 BP had been devoted to deciphering this influence, and it is the proper purview of specialists. Our purpose in this volume is not to focus on tracing the origin of specific features, such as plant species or pottery types. Rather, our purpose is to delineate the stages of sociocultural evolution in North America. Now, not surprisingly, since sociocultural evolution is law-governed, we shall see that it has been the same as everywhere else on the globe. Along the way, I will make note of the first appearance of or continuing use of specific plants and animals and particular styles and techniques in ceramic technology. Now, the desert culture of the far west, Cochise culture of Arizona. The desert culture is located in northwest Mexico in the states of Baja California and Sonora, and in the USA in the states of Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and southwest Colorado. It spans the period from 13,000 BP to 4,000 BP. Subsistence was gathering wild seeds and plants and on hunting small game. Social groups were nomadic bands. The people used baskets, nets, crude milling stones, simple bone tools, and stemmed or notched chipstone projectile points. By 9,000 BP, diagnostic at all desert culture sites are flat milling stones and basketry. Half of their diet was bred from wild seed flour, and the other half was every conceivable type of animal trap or hunted. The desert culture earliest period in New Mexico is called Sulphur Spring. It dates from 9,000 to 6,000 BP, and it was characterized by milling stones for grinding wild seeds and by various scrapers. The economy continued to be based on seed gathering and hunting. The second desert culture period is called Chiricahua, lasting from 6,000 to 4,000 BP. It witnessed the appearance of well-made projectile points. From 4,000 to 2,000 BP, the specific evolution of the New Mexican Western Desert culture is named for ancient Lake Cochise, now a dry desert basin called Wilcox Playa. Here, hunting and gathering bands evolved into the stage of band and tribal agriculture and prepared to become simple chiefdoms. We know this because excavation at Bat Cave, New Mexico in the 1980s, which I guess I should say is re-excavation, dated corn to 3120 BP, 3,120 years ago. This corn horticulture accompanied seed gathering. These remnants or remains of a primitive form of corn are proof of the beginning of the stage of tribal agriculture. Now, in the final San Pedro period from 2500 BP to AD 200, mortars and pestles replaced flat milling stones and pit houses, that is, houses of poles and earth built over pits, appear. During the San Pedro period, pottery appeared in the area of the Mogollon sub-area. Now, let's go for a moment to the subject of challenge. Beginning in Volume 1, we have discussed continuously the role of challenge in every part of the world where the chiefdom resolution of the crisis of tribal agriculture arose. Now, as of the moment, it has become clear that the original challenge was in the first area of agricultural revolution, that of nuclear China. The area centered on the Wangho and Yangtze rivers, where the challenge was the population explosion that accompanied the agricultural revolution. This area was the world's one, most favorable geographical locale in terms of climate, and two, plentiful plant and animal species. We have seen the same thing happen in the hilly flanks of Southwest Asia, the northern zone of Black Africa, from the Atlantic to the Arabian Sea, then in the highlands and lowlands of Mesoamerica, and finally in the central Andes of South America. In these latter exceptions to the initial rule of population explosion in response to positive opportunity, the spur to mobilizing natural and human labor resources came in the form of climate and resource scarcity and environmental catastrophe. Now, these are actually exceptions to the rule that the classical diagnostic reason for agricultural revolution was population explosion. Thus, the exceptions prove the rule. That is, it was always challenge presented by the social and/or natural environments that provided the opportunity for internal causation in the mode of production to negate itself in favor of onward and upward sociocultural evolution. The far west of the USA and Mexico had more than their share of resource scarcity and environmental catastrophes, spurring the tribal agriculturalists toward the simple chiefdom stage resolution. In fact, the stress of environmental fluctuation was so great that it propelled these first chiefdoms rapidly toward religion and the emergence of the advanced theocratic chiefdom stage. There are four sub-areas to the culture of northwest Mexico, southwest USA, the culture area. Now, from north to south, these are 1. The Anasazi sub-area that takes in southern Utah, southwest Colorado, northern Arizona to the northern Little River, Colorado River, and New Mexico south to a line from Quemodo to the Pecos River. Secondly, the Patayan sub-area directly west of the Anasazi sub-area through all of western Arizona and adjacent Sonora. And third, the Hohokam sub-area that takes in all of Arizona south of the Anasazi sub-area and all of Sonora south through the extent of the Yaqui River. And finally, number 4, the Mogollon sub-area that takes in all of New Mexico south of the Anasazi and eastern Arizona, then all of Chihuahua and adjacent Sonora. Its extent into Chihuahua does not end until after the rivers Conchos and Fuerte. For our purposes, we shall take the sequence of the Mogollon sub-area for the agricultural revolution from AD 200 to AD 1000, and then we shall continue our socio-cultural evolutionary journey to the servitude epoch with a selection from the archaeological data of the Chaco Canyon region. In other words, our journey from primitive communism in the west of North America will end with the establishment of full-fledged advanced theocratic chiefdoms. White contact in the form of conquest of Tenochtitlan cut this autochthonous process short in several ways, and within another century, white contact with New England began to affect the rest of native North America. So, from primitive communism to chiefdoms, the people of the Mogollon culture area spanned the centuries from AD 200 to AD 1450 in the mountainous and desert region of what is now southeastern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico. Their name derives from the Mogollon Mountains in New Mexico. These people made the first pottery in the southwest culture area. Now, in Chihuahua and New Mexico, north of the Rio Grande, there are 2 corn-centered agricultural complexes recognized archaeologically. The Upper Sonoran complex includes corn, squash, bottle gourd, that is Lagenaria ciceraria, and the common beans, Phaseolus vulgaris, and occurs where rainfall was greater than 8 inches annually. The Lower Sonoran complex, with less annual precipitation, includes corn, squash, cotton, tepary beans, that is Phaseolus acutifolius, lima bean, Phaseolus lunatus, scarlet runner bean, Phaseolus coccidius, and jack bean, Cannivalia ensiformis. Now, corn is radiocarbon dated to 3120 BP at Bat Cave in eastern New Mexico. The end of primitive communism, the 500 years from 100 BC to AD 400, witnessed the emergence of the stage of tribal agriculture which, as you know by now, is the last stage of primitive communism. This was the end of primitive communism in all four of the sub-areas of northwest Mexico, southwest USA, leading to the transition where the autochthonous inventions that formed the core of the desert culture and that received intermittent domesticate insertions along the mountain and coastal highways from Mesoamerica. From Cochise to Mogollon, there is excellent archaeological control over the chronology of all the sub-areas, and we shall focus on that of the Mogollon since it was the earliest in manifesting all of the most important diagnostics. This southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, and adjacent portions of the Mexican Republic are the geographical areas upon which we're focusing now. Mogollon 1 phase runs from 100 BC to AD 400. It was there are typically villages of 20 pit houses with outlying single-family pit house and three-family pit house hamlets. These faced east, but are otherwise randomly located here and there. Circular and oval-shaped pit houses with short entranceways are typical. The interior had about 17 square meters of living area, surrounded by benches. Wood was stored outside the home in specially constructed bell-shaped pits, and inside the homes in bins, subfloor pits, and wall cabinet niches. All pit houses had central fireplace stones shielded from draft, and vented wall cabinet. Vented upward through a hole in the roof. The first pottery in this Mexican USA culture area is found in this phase, which is also, to say again, the first pottery in our southwest culture area. Mogollon 2, that is, goes from AD 400, the 2 centuries, to AD 600. Round pit houses continue, as do similarly shaped chapels. The roofing of pit house homes was made of strong timbers, supported laterally at the edge of the above-ground section by adobe. Smaller wood pieces were laid over these timbers, and a mixture of dirt and stone grout cemented the whole, making the house rain and snow-proof. Mogollon 3 phase runs from AD 600 for 3 centuries to AD 900. Pit houses have D-shaped, that is the capital letter D, or elongated bean shapes. Center timbers were used to support a conical or gabled above-ground roof in the D-shaped homes, and 3 support pillars were used in the elongated bean-shaped homes. Distinct entryways to the pit houses are always present. Then we come to Mogollon 4, which runs for a century, from AD 900 to AD 1000. Living area decreased in size of the pit houses, accompanying a decrease in family life. The tradition of burying the dead outside the house or inside abandoned buildings. Burials were entire flexed bodies and sometimes cremation. Burial goods were placed with the interred. Now finally we come to Mogollon 5, that is from AD 1000 to AD 1390 years. There was a transition through time that featured pit house architecture moving to villages of above-ground houses with as many as 20 room structures. Structures of 100 or more apartments have been uncovered. In the Mimbres region at the Swartz site, one apartment building has 125 rooms, and there are several larger ones in the Mimbres Valley. Religious structures are located centrally and demonstrate the ATC level of socio-cultural evolution has been achieved. Structures are often centered on a common use plaza. Regional variation within the Mogollon sub-area features above-ground jackal architecture between pit houses and above-ground structures. Setting slim poles close together made a jackal structure. Larger versions were made of adobe bricks of sun-baked mud and sandstone, and by the end of Mogollon 5, we see masonry pueblos, that is small towns, in the Pine Lawn region. Now, as for the urban revolution in our culture area, There are many known early towns in the northwest Mexico, southwest USA culture area. I have selected the city of what is now the Chaco Culture National Historical Park because it has the most ancient ruins north of central Mexico, and it is the example for you to focus upon because it has the densest diagnostic urban concentration. It is located in northwestern New Mexico between Albuquerque and Farmington in a canyon cut by the Chaco Wash. Until the 1800s, the 15 major Chaco towns that were comprised of the largest buildings in North America. Its urban revolution fits into the great transition going on in the Mogollon sub-area that we followed above, that is between AD 900 and AD 1150. Chacoans quarried sandstone blocks and hauled building timber from great distances, assembling 15 major complexes. Evidence of astronomy at Chaco includes the Sundagger petroglyph at Fajada Butte. Chacoan buildings were aligned to reflect the solar and lunar cycles. Acquiring this knowledge would have required generations of astronomical observations and centuries of skillfully coordinated construction. This in itself is proof that its monumental architecture was a product of the advanced theocratic chiefdom, or ATC stage, sociocultural evolution. As we have seen, such societies must either advance to the class-divided and state-organized level of slavery or collapse in a rank war. By AD 1130, a great drought over the entire northwest Mexico, southwest USA culture area happened. The climate change lasted for 50 uninterrupted years. The ATC religion could not hold the society of Chaco together without state emergence. Accordingly, the primary causal factor of rank struggle resulted in the emigration of Chacoans and abandonment of the cities. However, the people continued to live in the area, and by AD 1180 gave rise to what are the contemporary Hopi and Pueblo people of the Four Corners region. Now we want to take a look at the archaic stage, archaeological stage, early basket makers. The first people in the San Juan Basin were hunters-gatherers. They evolved into the archaeological archaic as the early basket maker people. More than 70 campsites from this period are carbon dated to the period 9000 to 3500 BP, and they have been identified. Stone tools were found in Atlatl Cave and elsewhere within Chaco Canyon. These archaic early basket maker people were semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers making baskets to store gathered plants. Slab-lined storage containers prove the change from a wholly nomadic lifestyle. By the end of the period, they cultivated food. By 2900 BP, archaic people lived in Atlatl Cave and other caves and rock shelter sites. By AD 490, their descendants of the late basket makers, late basket maker II era, farmed the lands around Shabalashi village and other pit house settlements at Chaco. A small population of basket makers remained in the Chaco Canyon area. The broad arc of their cultural elaboration culminated around AD 800. During the Pueblo I era, when there were buildings, crescent-shaped stone complexes, each comprising 4 to 5 residential suites abutting subterranean chapels called kivos. Now, the Kachina ideology is the contemporary manifestation among the modern Hopi and other Pueblo people. These early kivas were square-walled and underground. Those used by the people of the Pueblo I period were round and evolved from simpler pit house structures. By AD 850, the population archaeologists call the Anasazi had rapidly expanded. People resided in larger, more densely populated urban centers. From the AD 900s, their ATC exhibits marked professional specialization in turquoise and in the trading industry. The first section of Pueblo Bonito was built. It has the iconic form we see as a curved row of 50 rooms near its present north wall, and there are photographs of this everywhere. Analysis of the mitochondria of 9 skeletons from graves of the ruling ranks in Pueblo Bonito show that members of an elite matrilineal descent were interred here for 330 years, between AD 800 and AD 1130. By AD 1140, as we've seen, the Chaco and ATC confronted rank inequality. Poor ATC boss management exacerbated the contradiction. Inadequate water management led to arroyo cutting. Extensive deforestation had become economically devastating because lumber for construction had to be hauled from outlying mountain ranges such as the Chusca Mountains, and these are more than 50 miles to the west, and without chattel animals the hauling had to be done by human workers. By the end of the century, the buildings in the Central Canyon had been sealed and abandoned. That is, by the end of the AD 1100s. Rank war impelled the evacuations. Remnants of that war include dismembered bodies dating from Chacoan times found at 2 sites within the Central Canyon. We know this violence was internal because there is no evidence of being defended or defensively sited high on cliff faces or atop mesas. Several sites in Chaco show large-scale burning as a result of that rank war. The Civil War went unresolved. People migrated south, east, and west into the valleys and drainages of the Little Colorado River, the Rio Puerco, and the Rio Grande. University of New Mexico professor Joseph Tainter examines collapse of the Chaco civilization in his 1988 study, The Collapse of Complex Societies, and I think it would be well worth your while, those of you that have an interest in these kinds of sociocultural evolutionary processes, to get that book from your library and read it. Now, Athabascan intrusion. The Ute and Shoshone people were present on the Colorado Plateau beginning in the AD 1100s. Nomadic southern Athabascan-speaking Apache and Navajo succeeded the Pueblo people in this region by AD 1400. In the process, they acquired Chacoan customs and agricultural skills. Ute tribal groups also frequented the region, primarily during hunting and raiding expeditions. The modern Navajo Nation lies west of Chaco Canyon, and many Navajo live in surrounding areas. Now, as for excavation and protection. In 1896, archaeological work began when an expedition from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, called the Hyde Exploring Expedition, went to excavate Pueblo Bonito, and after 5 summers in the region, it had sent over 60,000 artifacts back to New York and operated a series of trading posts to finance the work. After 1901, Samuel J. Holsinger noted prehistoric road segments and stairways above Chetroquetl and documented prehistoric dams and irrigation systems. Then Edward Lee Hewitt, president of New Mexico Highland University, mapped many Chacoan sites. In 1920, the National Geographic Society began an archaeological examination of Chaco Canyon and appointed Neil Judd to head the project. In 1921, Judd began a 7-field season series at Chaco. In 1925, Judd's workers had removed 100,000 short tons of overburden. He was using a team of 35 or more Indians, 10 white men, and 8 or 9 horses. Judd's team found 69 hearths in that ruin. He sent A.E. Douglas more than 90 specimens for tree ring dating. In 1929, the Judd team found that most of the beams, that is for the roofs, used at Chaco had been cut between AD 1033 and 1092. That was the period of greatest construction. In 1971, researchers Robert Lister and James Judge established the Chaco Center for Cultural Research. A number of multidisciplinary research projects, archaeological surveys, and limited excavations got underway. The Chaco Center extensively surveyed the Chacoan roads, which were well constructed and strongly reinforced through thoroughfares radiating from the Central Canyon. Again, this is more proof of its advanced theocratic chiefdom sociocultural status. So far identified are more than 2,400 archaeological sites within the Central Park's boundaries. Only a small percentage of these have been excavated, the idea being to emphasize maximum utility of scientific interdisciplinary approaches through the resolution of archaeological problems as our discipline of archaeology itself evolves. Now, as for settlement patterns, the Chacoans built their complexes along a 9-mile stretch of canyon floor. Some stretches were aligned in order of importance. Others were aligned using the 18.6-year cycle of minimum and maximum moonrise and moonset. The central portion of the canyon contains the largest Chacoan complexes. The most studied has been Pueblo Bonito, that abuts the northern rim of the canyon. It covers almost 2 acres and has 650 rooms. It is the largest great house, being four stories high in parts of it. Now, the builders' use of core and veneer architecture and multi-story construction necessitated massive masonry walls, often 3 feet thick. Pueblo Bonito is divided into 2 sections by a wall precisely aligned to run north-south, bisecting the central plaza. A great kiva was placed on either side of the wall, that is a chapel or a temple, creating a symmetrical pattern common to many Chacoan great houses. The scale of the complex, upon completion, rivaled that of the Roman Colosseum. So you can see that this was an advanced theocratic chiefdom on the verge of statehood. Casa Rinconada, isolated from the other central sites, sits to the south side of Chaco Wash, adjacent to a Chacoan road leading to a set of steep stairs that reach the top of Chacra Mesa. Its sole kiva, or temple, stands alone with no residential or support structures whatsoever. It did once have a 39-foot passageway leading from the underground kiva to several above-ground levels. Chetrocetl, located near Pueblo Bonito, bears the typical capital D shape of many other central complexes. Begun between 1020 and 1050, its 450 to 550 rooms shared one great temple, or kiva. Experts estimated that it took 29,135 man-hours to erect Chetrocetl alone. Hewitt estimated that it took the wood of 5,000 trees and 50 million stone blocks. Pueblo del Arroyo, which was founded between AD 1050 and 1075, was completed by AD 1125. It sits at a drainage outlet known as South Gap. It has a large semicircular set of tumbled down and ruined walls that are gray, yellow, brown in color. The far side is a straight line, roughly parallel to a line of cliffs in the far distance. Quincletzo was a medium-sized complex located a half-mile west of Pueblo Bonito. It was built and occupied by people from the northern San Juan Basin region. Its rectangular shape and design is related to the Pueblo II cultural group rather than the Pueblo III style or its Chacoan variant. It contains 55 rooms, 4 ground floor kivas, and a 2-story cylindrical tower that functioned as a religious center as well. Now, evidence of an Atc obsidian processing industry was discovered that began there by AD 1125. Now, that of course is more evidence of professional specialization, preparation of materials for exchange, not only within society but between them. Now, 9 large round pits are seen from above in washed out daylight. 8 of the pits descend from a common stone platform. The 9th sits alone on a somewhat higher stone surface. The depressions run diagonally from bottom right to middle top. At the bottom left are 8 smaller, regularly sized rectangular rooms enclosed by ruined walls. To their left are larger ruined enclosures. Bordering the rings at top and right are various smaller rooms and walls that appear less ruined. Chaco's small kivas numbered around 100, each hosting rituals for 50 to 100 worshippers. The 15 much larger great kivas held up to 400 parishioners at a time. Pueblo Alto is a great house of 89 rooms located on Mesa Top near the middle of Chaco Canyon, 0.6 miles from Pueblo Bonito. It was begun in AD 1020 and construction lasted another 30 years. This was during a wider building boom throughout the canyon. Its location made the community visible to most of the inhabitants of the San Juan Basin. It was 2.5 miles north of Sincletzin. On the opposite side of the canyon, it was the center of a bead, chert, and turquoise processing industry. 20 professional specialist families lived in the complex. Another great house, Nuevo Alto, was built on the North Mesa near Pueblo Alto. It was founded in AD 1190. A cluster of apartment houses lies at Chaco's northern reaches. Among them is the large Casa Chiquita, which means actually small house, built in the AD 1080s when ample rainfall allowed agriculture to expand. Its layout featured a smaller, square profile without open plazas of its predecessors. Larger square blocks of stone were used in the masonry. Its kivas were designed in the northern Mesa Verde tradition. 2 miles down the canyon is Penasco Blanco, an arc-shaped apartment building atop the southern rim of the canyon. Construction occurred in 5 distinct stages, or building phases, between AD 900 and 1125. A cliff painting of the supernova platograph records the SN 1054 supernova of July 5, 1054. Hungopavi, located 1 mile from Unavida, measured 872 feet in circumference. Initial probes revealed 72 ground-level rooms, with structures reaching 4 stories in height. 1 large circular kiva, or temple, has been identified. Kin Nahaspas, built in either the 9th or 10th centuries AD, is slightly north of Unavida at the foot of the North Mesa. Tsin Kletzen, which means charcoal place, a compound located on the Chakra Mesa and positioned above Casa Rinconada, is 2.3 miles due south of Pueblo Alto on the opposite side of the canyon. Hueritos Dam, a nearby massive earthen structure, provided Tsin Kletzen with all of its water by retaining stormwater runoff in a reservoir. Massive amounts of silt accumulated during flash floods. This meant deploying labor corvees to regularly rebuild the dam and dredge the catchment. Unavida is one of 3 oldest large apartment houses. Construction began in AD 900. It had 2 stories and 124 rooms. It shares an arc or D-shaped design with its contemporaries Penasco Blanco and Pueblo Bonito, but has a unique dogleg addition made necessary by the topography. It is located in one of the canyon's major side drainages near Gallo Wash and was massively expanded after AD 930. Wijiji, or Black Greasewood, had 110 rooms and is the smallest of the great houses. Built between AD 1110 and AD 1115, it was the last Chacoan great house to be constructed. Somewhat isolated within the narrow wash, it is positioned 1 mile from neighboring Unavida. Directly north are communities even more remote. Salmon ruins and Aztec ruins, sited on the San Juan River and Animas River near Farmington, were built during a 30-year wet period commencing in AD 1100. Now, some 60 miles directly south of Chaco Canyon, on the Great South Road, lies another cluster of outlying professional specialist communities. The largest, Kin Nizoni, stands atop a 7,000-foot mesa surrounded by marshy bottomlands. Casamero Pueblo is located on McKinley County Road 19 near Tecolote Mesa, a red sandstone mesa. It was connected to its nearby outlier, Andrews Ranch, via Chacoan Road and Chaco Canyon, Aztec ruins, Salmon ruins, and Casimiro Pueblo are on the trail of the ancient scenic byway. Now, as for ATC architecture, immense temples embodied worship at Chaco, whose priests used unique masonry techniques in their architecture. These constructions lasted decades and even centuries. These temples feature core traits, beginning with one, their great size. The temple complexes had then 200 to 700 rooms of considerable size, with higher ceilings than Anasazi buildings of the preceding periods. 2, they were well planned, with their wings erected at one time. Thirdly, temple complex houses faced the south. 4, edifices of sealed-off rooms and high walls surrounded the plazas. 5, houses stood 4 or 5 stories tall, with the single-story rooms facing the plaza. And 6, blocks of rooms were terraced, so the tallest sections were at the rear, often organized into suites, with front rooms larger than rear, interior, and storage rooms or areas. Kiva chapels and temples were built in proportion to the number of rooms in an urban edifice. There was one Kiva chapel for every 30 rooms. 9 urban sites have temples that are 60+ feet in diameter. T-shaped doorways and stone lintels are features of Kiva chapels. Simple and compound walls of temples were made of core and veneer. 2 parallel load-bearing walls were made of dressed, flat sandstone blocks cemented with a clay mortar. Gaps between walls were packed with rubble, as were the wall cores. Walls were then covered in a distinctive patterned veneer of small sandstone pieces, which were pressed into a layer of binding mud. Over 200,000 pieces of turquoise have been excavated from the ruins of Chaco Canyon, much of it destined for the veneer. Now, as for the ATC unifying religion, these temple complexes required the wood of 200,000 coniferous trees. Of course, lacking chattel animals, timber had to be hauled by humans from mountain ranges some 70 miles distant. By AD 1030, meticulously designed temple buildings were being built. The ATC Chacoans created architectural designs that featured astronomical alignments, geometry, landscaping, and civil engineering into these ancient urban centers. This meant a series of professional specialist ranks and the priests and priestesses. Some of these technical and religious specialists occupied the temples at Chaco. The canyon itself runs along one of the lunar alignment lines, providing its original choice to have been made by priests of the ATC unifying religion. We can deduce that it had an astronomical importance in their ideology. Turquoise was also ideologically important to the people of Chaco. Around 200,000 pieces of turquoise have been excavated from the ruins of Chaco Canyon. Professional specialist workshops are proof of a rank complex, one responsible for the manufacture of turquoise beads, veneer pieces, and a variety of other turquoise artifacts. Turquoise was used for grave goods, burials, and ceremonial offerings. Over 15,000 turquoise beads and pendants accompanied 2 ruling rank burials at Pueblo Bonito. At this time, the ancestral Pueblo Anasazi society experienced a population and construction boom. Throughout the AD 900s, Chacoan building techniques spread from the canyon to neighboring regions. By AD 1115, at least 70 outlying urban pueblos had been built within the 25,000 square miles of the San Juan Basin. 30 urban centers spread across 65,000 square miles and were connected to the Central Canyon and to one another by a highway web of 6 Chacoan road systems, extending up to 60 miles in straight routes. These had to have been extensively surveyed and engineered. Their depressed and scraped caliche beds, caliche is something that's common in the west of the U.S., comes from rainfall and the concentration of calcium carbonate. in the ground. So you can break that up and use it like stone. Their depressed and scraped caliche beds averaged 30 feet in width, with a raised barrier separating the road from the surrounding ground. These berms were made of dirt or rock and formed into low walls as needed for the terrain. Likewise, as necessary, the roads had steep stone stairways and rock ramps to surmount cliffs and other obstacles. An 11th century pictograph at Chaco Canyon, as I mentioned before, depicts the supernova of AD 1054. This supernova and the moon were in this configuration as shown there in that pictograph when the supernova was near its brightest. There is an imprint of a hand at the top. Two whorl, W-H-O-R-L, shaped etchings near the top of Fajada Butte compose the sun dagger petroglyph. They are tucked behind the rock panels of the three slab site. These two spirals are principal and ancillary. The latter left-hand spiral captured both spring and fall equinoxes. Its artifice was revealed by a descending spear of light filtered through the slabs and shone upon it and split in two. The former and larger whorl to its right was lit by the titular sun dagger, which bisected it through another interplay of slab and sunlight. It struck it brilliantly as the summer sun attains its solstice midday peak. The movie Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, shows in fictional example exactly how such cylindrical solar beams were utilized. Now, sun dagger discoverer Anna Sofar says the Chacoans were marking the middle of time. Each turn of the 9.25 turn large spiral was found to mark 1 year in the 18.6 year lunar excursion cycle of the rising midwinter full moon. This record is kept by a slab-cast lunar shadow, whose edge strikes each ring in succession. As the full minimum moon closest to the winter solstice rises, the shadow's edge precisely strikes the center of the larger spiral. It steps outward year by year, ring by ring, until it strikes the outermost edge of it during the full maximum moon again in midwinter. Fajada Butte bears 5 other petroglyphs, including a carving of a rattlesnake, other spirals, and a rectangle. Now these are lit by contrast between sunbeams and shadows during equinoxes or solstices. A partly overcast sky and subdued sunlight over a roughly 6-foot tall wall of different sized dusky tan sandstone bricks exists here. The wall runs diagonally from the immediate foreground and left towards the right for several dozen feet to the near middle distance. A few feet to the right, in the middle foreground, a low ring of similar blocks delimits a circular pit sunk into the ground. The remains of several other low walls, 1 to 3 feet high, are in parallel. They align left to right from the high diagonal wall. Perhaps a mile distant to the center and right, a canyon wall slopes, becoming level at the valley floor on which the walls sit. Now, the Casa Rinconada Temple. 12 of the 14 largest Chacoan temple complexes were built with an alignment in coordination. Each of them was oriented along axes that mirrored the passing of the sun and moon at visually pivotal times. The first great house known to evince fastidious proportioning and alignments was Casa Rinconada. The twin T-shaped portals of 33-foot radius of the Great Kiva Temple were north-south collinear. Their axes joined opposing windows, passing within 4 inches of its center. The Solstice Project and the U.S. National Geodetic Survey studied the geometry of location of the great apartment houses of Pueblo Bonito and Chiricahua. That study concluded that original siting was along a precisely east-west line, which was an axis that captures the passage of the equinox sun. The lines perpendicularly bisecting their principal walls are aligned north-south, implying an intent to mirror the equinox midday. Pueblo Alto and Chichen are also north-south aligned. These two axes form an inverted cross when viewed from above. Its northbound reach is extended another 35 miles past Pueblo Alto by the Ramrod Strait Great North Road. That road is a pilgrimage route that modern-day Pueblo Indians believe to be an allusion to myths surrounding their arrival from the distant north. Two shared latitude but diametrically opposed complexes, Pueblo Pintado and Quien Mineola, are located 15 miles from the core buildings of the Central Canyon. Each lies on a path from the Central Canyon that is collinear with the passage and setting of the full midwinter minimum moon that recurs every 18.6 years. Two other complexes are less distant from Pueblo Bonito. Una Vida and Penasco Blanco share an axis collinear with the passage of the full maximum moon, and the terms minimum and maximum refer to the azimuth extreme points in the lower lunar excursion cycle, or the swings in direction relative to true north that the setting full moon exhibits. It takes roughly 9.25 years for the rising or setting full moon nearest to winter solstice to proceed from the maximum azimuthal north, or maximum extremum, to its southernmost azimuth, known as minimum extremum. Now, the overall cultural pattern to global ATC religion, that is, again, global advanced theocratic chief religion as a socio-cultural stage, is repeated here in northwest Mexico, southwest USA culture area in every respect. Underlying all is gaining the willing submission of a mass of farming and professional specialist families to strong central rank, rule, and dictate. Without the state, that is the army and police, an advancing society must be either held together by sweetness rather than by the stick, or it will collapse. Eventually, they will all eventually fail. But in the northwest Mexico, southwest USA, when the interlopers arrived before their own autochthonous exploiters could establish their dictatorship, the advanced theocratic chiefdom stage collapsed there. And that brings us to a conclusion of this first half of the lecture on agricultural revolution in North America. And in the next lecture, we're going to move on to exactly how this happened and take a look at the chronology of the eastern woodlands of the USA. And I'm going to shut her down at that point.